Over the past few weeks, our next guest has knocked even Gordon Brown, David Cameron and Nick Clegg off the front pages of the papers because she's brought out an autobiography and she's confessed to taking cocaine whilst filming on the set of Corrie, fighting an alcohol addiction, battling depression, that it says in all the newspaper stories Denise Welch left you on the verge of suicide and you tried to take your own life, but...
Yes, not quite. I mean, I think there in the introduction it said several suicide attempts. I thought about it several times, but didn't quite sort of get that far, thankfully. But yes, it's proved to be quite controversial.
But you see, why did you lay yourself so bare? You could have done, I mean, you know, you're a top actress, you're a top TV presenter. You could have done quite a rose-tinted autobiography. Why did you have to go into
because,
such
Eamon, I think that you and Ruth know that I'm nothing if not open, especially on programmes like Loose Women, which has given me this sort of profile that people can speculate on your life. I mean, obviously all of us, all of the girls, are quite pleased that we still are on the covers of magazines. In fact, one of my favourite quotes was something like, are Denise Welch, Jane McDonald and Colleen Nolan becoming the Kate, Sienna and Jordan of the old birds? So you do have to embrace these magazine stories, and, you know, they say things like Denise has gone missing in Prague when you're doing the sausages for your kids' tea. But on a more serious level, when I was approached to do this, initially I was going to write a book about my battle, as you mentioned, with clinical depression, which started as postnatal depression when I had Matthew. And as I started to write, I realised that I couldn't really write about my illness, about my condition, without taking the reader down the dark paths which it took me to. I also want to point out that I'm not trying to excuse some bad decisions and some bad behaviour by saying, oh, please forgive me, it's because I was depressed. My depression did cause some of my behavioural issues, but certainly not all of them. They were just badly judged mistakes.
So you take this right back to when you had your eldest son, who's now 21.
21, Matty, yeah.
Did you realise you had postnatal depression? Because so many women we talked to, it either wasn't diagnosed or they didn't really realise, or people said, oh, it's a bit of the baby blues.
Well, do you know something? The reason why I called the book Pulling Myself Together was because of the two stock phrases when you're depressed, whether it starts postnatally or not. And in the early days, people would say, oh, come on, you've got a beautiful, healthy baby, you've got money in the bank, you've got a wonderful husband and a much-wanted, healthy child. Snap out of it and pull yourself together. As if you wouldn't want to, you know. And, of course, you're faced with the front of Parent and Baby magazine and the mum and babies are smiling, and it's so hard for the partner whose wife has had a baby and they're all out having a fabulous time and you're sort of rocking in a corner at home. With mine, it was quite obvious what it was because of the severity, and it came on over... I mean, I had a wonderful pregnancy. I was a typical blooming woman in pregnancy. My hair was glossy. I didn't have any spots. I loved being pregnant. I didn't really want the baby to come out. I was having such a brilliant time. I loved it. And so, of course, I was the last person that people thought would suffer. And some psychologists that I subsequently met, because I went public about it and did shows like The Time, The Place, and it was so important to me that if it could happen to me, it could happen to anybody. And there were many people who said, oh, we would have been able to tell in pregnancy. You couldn't have told with me. I'm not saying you can't in every case, but you couldn't have with me.
I'll tell you what else I can't tell. Normally when people talk about clinical depression, you associate them as being introvert, as hiding away from the world. Now, you may well have done that, but a lot of what you term bad behaviour has been quite public as well, quite extrovert in a way. Does that tell me that depression isn't standard for everyone? It takes
well, no, I mean, well, certainly with postnatal, they prefer to call it postnatal illness now because it does manifest in different ways. But with me, although I have suffered panic and anxiety at times, my illness has mostly been severe clinical depression, which is really, really hard to explain. And one of the more controversial aspects of the book, which they talk about, you know, the fact that I was self-medicating during my Coronation Street days. I mean, I was at Corrie for 4 years, and if I was you know, doing that all the time, I wouldn't have been able to forge a successful character that Natalie became, obviously, and there were some great times, and I met some of my best friends, including Sally and Beverly, who's talking about her battle.
Yeah. Did you first take cocaine because you thought it would stop you feeling depressed? So you get into this kind of chicken and egg spiral.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I was using it in those days. It was trying to make myself... It wasn't trying to make myself feel high, it was to try and make myself feel better. I'm not saying also that I didn't use it recreationally as well at other times, but the time I talk about the bad times, I was just trying to feel normal and trying to hold down a job, a show that was being watched by 20-odd million people. with a, you know, with a sort of successful character, lots of great storylines, and going through one of the worst pits of my life, because at that time, nothing was working for me. Talking therapy didn't work for me. The antidepressants I was on, and I'm a huge advocate of antidepressants. People should take them and must take them because they really do help to make you better.
Do you still take them?
Yes, I do, and I always will take them. But what's happened to me now is that 3 years ago, on the set of Waterloo Road, I was kind of losing my battle with the illness. It had come back. I had a breakdown when I was doing a pantomime 5 years ago. And I was tired of fighting it. And the periods of intensity, the intensity was greater and the periods of wellness were getting less and less. And I really was struggling. And I was, just by luck, was introduced to this chap called Professor John Studd in London, who treats reproductive depression. So that's either if it's premenstrual syndrome or postnatal depression, which then becomes a lifelong battle with it. And I've, for 21 years, been saying the origin of my illness was hormonal. I know it was. And the triggers then become psychological. And he found that I was almost deficient in estrogen and actually progesterone intolerant, and I had a Mirena coil which has the localized progesterone that was whipped out, and I say he saved my life, and I don't mean to be dramatic about it, and it still chokes me up, and I've had a tear on loose women when I've talked about it, because 90% of the time I'm now well. It does come back and bites me on the bum occasionally and says, you're not through this, so I still live with a mental illness, but most of the time I'm well.
Not only mental illness, so many illnesses, so many conditions that people have are related to hormones that I think are not looked at enough, and the function of the pituitary gland, men and women. It's an incredible thing you say. But let me ask you this. There you are, you're prone to depression, you're living with depression, you're living with the pressure of being an actress and so many different things, and you're a mum, a wife, and you've children and all that sort of thing. And then you get headlines. You've got to live your life in the public eye as well. A lot of people look for excuses when they have alcoholism or when they have depression, whatever, to send them back into the spiral.
I've been my own worst enemy at times, though.
But how do you cope with that when you're at home and, you know, everything, I mean, you're cooking the breakfast or whatever you're doing?
I don't do the cooking, Eamon.
And the Sunday papers arrive, you know what I mean? And then, you know, how on earth do you hold it together?
Well, I've got a very, very supportive family for a start. I mean, Matthew, for one, people have said, you know, people have said to me, did your family know about the book? And my answer is, it's not just like I went, if you pop down to your local bookstore, you'll see a very revealing autobiography that I penned in the back room. Of course they knew about it. They all sanctioned it. They all read it. Matty hasn't read it yet. He'd rather read books by Stephen Fry. But Matty said, Mum, you know when they do the reviews on the back of your book? And I said, yeah. He said, can we just put Jesus Christ, Mother, Matthew Healy?
And let me ask you, Tim, your husband, who we know, when we were out with you socially just a fortnight ago, as a bloke, you know, when I'm reading through your book now, I honestly, just as a bloke, I have to be honest with you, I say, that man has a lot to put up with. I'm not saying he doesn't love you or whatever. I'm not saying that he shouldn't understand it, but it does seem to be a lot. Maybe you have a lot to put up with him, but as
actually
a bloke,
for any family,
well, as a husband, I would say,
affected.
how does it, well, from one of about, how does he stick you, basically?
Well, do you know, we should do a strand on this show, which spend a week with Tim Healy. Perhaps you'd like to be first up for that, Eamon Holmes, as you've brought it up. Listen, we kind of get each other, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And as I say, there's nothing in this book that I would have, of course, had out there. And there's some things which have been hard for him to read. But he said, that's fine, go for it. And you know, and we support each other and we stick by each other. And we've been through a lot. And
well, that's amazing.
We've been together for 21 years. And people can comment on people's marriages when they've been together for 4.5 minutes. And I go, come back when you've been married 21 years and let me see. But, you know... We're hanging on in there.
Depression not only affects the person who's suffering, but it does affect the fallout, affects the whole family,
absolutely
doesn't
does,
it?
you know. And I think that when you read, what upsets me is when you read tragic headlines that people have taken their own lives because of a battle with depression, and people say, oh, for goodness sake, look at her. She had a successful business, she had wonderful children. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean anything, do you know what I mean? But also, my family have never ever doubted, Tim, my mum, my dad, my sister, that what I had was an illness. They've never seen it as an indulgence, and it's very hard to explain.
Listen, we're so glad you have, because, you know, when we said to people, we were on Twitter and telling them you were coming on the show, the response is amazing, because...
Well, I hope so.
You know,
and I hope people know that there are some laughs in the book, Ruth, as well.
Yes, there are. Oh, believe me.
Well, you can't be around you for too long without having a laugh.
Pulling myself together, Denise Walsh, it is a great read, and thank you, because
thank
I know
you for
there will
having
be
me on.
people who are feeling like you felt at that time, who think it's just them, and to have someone like you talking about it does
Well, I hope
so much
so.
good,
I hope
Denise.
so.
Really
And that
does.
hormone check. I think that's a very interesting thing as well.
I think so too.
Thank you,
for
Denise.
being
Thank you
so
very
I'm going
much.
to get yours checked.
Well, I
That's why you
agree.
get a bit grumpy sometimes, is it? It's your hormones.
Goodness, what I'm deficient in that you're mocking.
Yes.
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 Not
We're
what
going to
she's
take
told
a
me you're
break.
deficient in. Anyway, never mind.
We are. Look.